questions and some good discussion. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jill Mendelson. I'm with the Nonprofit Help Desk, which is a program of the Jewish Community Council of Greater Coney Island. Welcome to our spring workshop series. The topic today is about governance and board development. And this is a topic that's of vital importance to all community organizations and nonprofits that are looking to build a foundation upon which to deliver services and grow their organization. Briefly, the Nonprofit Help Desk is a program that works with grassroots organizations, emerging nonprofits, to help them master the skills of organizational development. We cover a range of different topical areas, including strategic planning, financial management, marketing, communications, technology, fundraising, and governance are just a few. Each year, we offer a series of workshops in the fall and again in the spring. And in addition, we offer consultative support on a limited basis to organizations, in particular those that attend our workshops and that have additional questions or are in need of project support to further their work in a particular area. This slide here represents some of the programming that's coming up. If you are on our mailing list, you're getting our constant contact emails. If you are not, we will put a link in the chat so that you can sign up and we can add you to our distribution list. Today's program, as I said, is on the importance of governance and building a board. How do you find the right board members? How do you understand the skills that will be important to have? What do you do in growing and supporting an effective board? Our presenter is Amy Fiore. She has a lot of expertise working in the nonprofit community. She's led an organization. She's a consultant providing support in a range of important areas like strategic planning, fundraising, and board development. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy. But before, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the New York City Council and the Department for Youth and Community Development, which are the funders that are behind the scenes in supporting the work of the Nonprofit Help Desk. If everybody can stay on mute, that would be great. If you have questions, let's use the chat. We can go back and forth on the chat. And again, we will have time at the end if we can get into a discussion about what you're experiencing with board development, what some of the challenges are, and we can hopefully talk together and think together about ways to solve those problems. Amy, thank you. I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks so much, Jill, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, but first, I would love to know a little bit about all of you. If you wouldn't mind putting in the chat your name, your organization, and your role within the organization, and a little bit, very, very brief, because it's hard to read them as they all appear. But tell me about your board. What encouraged you to sign up today? Sort of in 10 words or less. What are your board challenges? What is it that you want to know so that we're sure that this time is meaningful to you today? While you're doing that, a little bit about me. My name is Amy Fiore. I go by pronouns she, her. I am a facilitator for the Nonprofit Help Desk and also serve as the managing director of Sobel Bixel Consulting for Nonprofits, where I engage in direct fundraising for clients and oversee our strategic, organizational, and development planning work. A lot of that is with board development, board training, and strategic planning, which is some of my favorite things to be able to talk about. I'm also the director of development for Story Pirates Changemakers, which is an arts and literacy organization based in New York City and Los Angeles. Story Pirates Changemakers is the nonprofit arm of the Story Pirates. So if you are a parent of elementary age kids, you may have listened to our very wildly popular podcast. I personally came up through the nonprofit ranks in the arts, education, youth development, and human services sector, mostly in Manhattan, and segueing into development when I realized I personally was too verbose for tweeting. I've served as an executive director and managing director for nonprofits, and I've learned by doing, realizing the mistakes I've made, and then doing over and over and over again. My favorite type of work as a consultant is in strategically poking the status quo, finding simpler and more sensible solutions to common problems, and inspiring staffs and boards to do the same so they can simplify and really focus on serving and funding their missions. Let's see who is here today. Thank you all for joining the chat. I'm just going to do a smattering of these since all of you are able to read them. We have someone here with the challenge of recruiting women to join the leadership training program. Someone would like more information about how to grow their board to help highlight their mission. Without extra resources, where do I go and who do I turn to find good board members? Creating a new nonprofit organization to archive independent media projects. Very small board, large country bar association board in a national organization. So several different types of organizations here. Thank you all so much for sharing all of this. And I think we're going to cover many of these topics, but feel free to keep the chat going. We're going to leave some room for Q&A at the end to make sure that we are answering your questions and serving your needs to the best of our ability. And if for some reason we aren't and you want to do some follow-up time, the Nonprofit Help Desk does make some hours available to do that. And we'll tell you about that at the end. All right, let's start with the basics. When you incorporated as a nonprofit organization, some of you did this recently, some of you, it happened, long before you were with the organization, so you may not be as familiar. There were really only three basic requirements for your nonprofit organization. You needed a mission statement, you needed bylaws, and you needed a minimum of 3 people, a president, a vice president, and a combined treasurer and secretary. That was it. Now, sometimes we call this the board of trustees, sometimes we call it the board of advisors, those pains in the you-know-whats, but basically, they are a group of people who support an organization in myriad ways. And the ways in which your board can support your organization really drastically varies from one nonprofit to another. To maintain your 501c3 status, it's also, it's really very simple that these main things about 3 people, they need to be over 18 years of age, and their only job actually from the federal level in a legal capacity is to approve an annual budget for the organization. So in other words, we talk a lot about boards. We're going to talk for an hour about boards, but from the federal level, the whole gig is about collective responsibility. Purpose of your organization is to serve your community, and you receive tax privileges on the assumption that you're going to use donated funds in the service of that mission. So the purpose of having a board as a governing body is very simply to oversee that responsibility and make sure that funds and management is being executed ethically. It's all relatively basic. So individual states have then set standards for the responsibilities of a board of directors, and you can look them up for New York State. They're definitely worth reading because many funders and auditors take them very, very seriously. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them today, but do want to note a few things as you're starting to think about this, because this is going to come up later as we talk about your board's job description and as we talk about the recruitment of board members, because these are the expectations that you're going to be managing. Next few slides are going to be a little overwhelming. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. Don't worry. A lot of these things are down the road. These things are very accessible with a simple Google search, but want to just touch on a few of them. The first are the duties of care. New York State recommends the following duties of care. It compels the board to be familiar with the organization's finances and activities and participate regularly in governance, attend meetings, actively participate, read the minutes of prior meetings and reports provided, including financial statements and reports by employees. Make sure there's a clean process for approval of major obligations, such as fundraising and professional fees, compensation, etc. You want to make sure that the board is looking at financial charts and reports are clear, making sure there is an ongoing budget to actual comparison with discrepancies explained. The board should be participating in risk assessment and strategic planning, discussions about the future of the organization, and they should be involved in the selection and periodic review of the performance of the organization executives. And the board should be responsible for the diversity among board members. There's then a whole piece of duty of loyalty. long and complicated, but basically comes down to being committed to the mission and to the purpose of the mission, and identifying conflicts of interest, and making sure that, in your actions as a board member, you are being loyal to the organization. And then lastly, the duty of obedience, making sure as a board, your role is to dedicate the organization's resources to its mission, ensuring that the organization carries out its purposes, doesn't engage in unauthorized or illegal activity, complying with appropriate laws. Now, these are, interestingly, not required aspirations for your boards. They are very strong suggestions. There are many funders that require them. And some of you may be looking at this and saying, I don't actually want my board to fulfill all of these roles. We want our board to be a fundraising board, but we don't really need them for governance, or the other way around. We need a governing board, but a lot of our money comes in from government entities, and we don't really need them to do a lot of fundraising, or it's very clear that they don't want to do a whole lot of fundraising. It's not for me to say what role your board should be for your individual organization, certainly not in this capacity. It really is different for every type of nonprofit. It also depends on where you are in your organization's history, especially as your company grows and changes. What I can talk about, though, is what we in nonprofit leadership are seeing as ideal purposes, that as I've worked with 50 plus organizations, these roles that consistently seem to serve boards from one organization to another. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So the board makes decisions crucial to the life and direction of the organization. They should be responsible for governing the organization, and that includes hiring and firing leadership, right? Evaluating leadership. They authorize significant financial transactions. They authorize significant programmatic changes, and ideally, the board is responsible ultimately for growing or decreasing their own group. The board is responsible for board development in the ideal situation. Now, before I see the chat light up, I acknowledge that that does not happen everywhere. And if you don't have a board yet, they can't do it. If you have a small board, they're going to be more challenged to do it. So a lot of times, especially early in an organization's tenure, it is on the staff, it is on the founder to be able to find a board. But what we want to encourage and what we want to talk about is, while the staff is doing this, and while the staff is an active participant in board development, you should from the get-go be talking to your board about their own role in board development. Now, that does not mean that the board should be getting involved with other day-to-day activities and the management of the organization. The ideal board also gets to the point where they can hire staff who they trust to manage the day-to-day of an organization. Now, smaller, newer organizations, sometimes it's a necessity that the board also acts as the staff. Sometimes a board member manages marketing or writes grant proposals or runs a ticket counter, and that absolutely works, especially for a period of time. The trouble is, as an organization grows, legally, the entire group can't be compensated for their work on the board because it poses a complicated conflict of interest. So typically, once an organization has enough capital to hire staff, the board shifts to a fundraising and ambassadorship role. And most of the time, that is the best thing for an organization. So let's talk about the big one. The first shift that we see is to what we call the give-get. Many nonprofit organizations that maintain larger boards simply for the goal of increased donations and fundraising opportunities for the organization. If any of you are unfamiliar with this term, often board members are expected to make a predetermined minimum give, which is typically a set or personally meaningful donation to the organization. They are also expected to reach a certain get, which are monetary donations solicited by that board member. Sometimes nonprofit organizations like to say give, get, or get off. I don't love that term because I do think that there are a lot of variances to this. Sometimes organizations say give and get. Sometimes organizations say give or get. Sometimes organizations say give and or get. And I think making this an open conversation, making this a decisive conversation, but one that starts with nuance, one that starts with understanding where each board member comes from, one that starts with some flexibility about what does it mean to give. For some people, is that time? For some people, is that resources? For some people, is that in kind? All of these are really valid and important conversations to be having with with your board of directors. But for most organizations, especially larger organizations, giving and getting typically accounts for about 10% of an organization's total budget. And as staff, it is also your job to support the get. It's the rare board member who writes their own appeal, prints it, and mails it. And the fact is, you probably don't want them to do that. Do they really have the right letterhead and the current program descriptions? And if your board was going and doing their fundraising on their own, are you obtaining the contact information for their friends that way and starting to develop your own relationship with those individuals? Probably not. So each element of your fundraising plan should include the board get component, which means specifically crafting messages and content for your board to distribute to help them reach their get. We'll talk more about that later, because really the point of bringing this up right now is that money with the board makes things tricky. A board member has a complicated relationship with an organization. They're donors, but they're also volunteers. A lot of times they're worker bees, but they're also the governing body. And so it's this odd dichotomy of doing the work for you while you ultimately work for them. They're a group that has or should have invested time and money into your vision, and they should believe in it and want to help it succeed. But there is a challenge, maybe even a price to pay in that. And finding ways to identify and work with and mold and cultivate each of your board members individually and the group as a whole becomes a big and central part of your job. So I want to start by looking at what makes someone want to join a board and how do you identify those kinds of people? How do you respect and honor the things that make them want to join a board while getting what you need for your organization? So I have determined there are 5 different types of board members. I challenge you to come up with another one with me because I think that there's probably a 6th, but usually they overlap enough that I've stuck with my 5. And we're going to talk about these kinds of people, how to identify them, how to vet them, and how to manage them. Just going to take a quick look, see if there's any questions that popped up. Let's see. All right, we're going to talk about this. I see that my understanding is that bid boards don't have a fundraising role. We can absolutely talk about that. And should bylaws spell out consequences? I'm going to come back to these questions. Jill, if I can ask you to remind me about these questions later, we will definitely get back to those. All right, on to the 5 types of board members. Number 1 is the enthusiast. They're enthusiastic about your mission. And I think this is the best type of board member. They're committed to the work. They're willing to give time and hopefully money towards supporting their vision. What a beautiful thing. You want to be looking for these folks and hanging on to them. The pitfall might come with a board member like this, where they have a vision of their own that either aligns with yours or not, and their support seems to go from what can I do for you or the organization to here's what I think the organization should be. Now, when this board member is a professional in your field and they have a constructive point of view and they are ultimately looking out for the best interests of the organization, they should be engaged in spirited discussion. It fuels their interest in the mission. And just because you would consider their ideas with an open mind doesn't mean that you have to take them. With your board, part of the way of working effectively with a board is being open to criticism. And part of the ways of effectively recruiting a board is being honest and upfront about how much control and participation a board member is going to have in the day-to-day. These things need to be stated. These things need to be understood and need to be agreed upon and then documented. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but this is going to come up a lot. You are looking for the enthusiast. You are looking for who is interested in the work that you are doing. And often they're right there under your nose. You may not have noticed them just yet, but they're keeping an eye out on your organization. They may be giving small amounts right now. They may be liking your social media posts. You want to be looking for these individuals. Next, there is the vested, someone who has another vested interest in the organization. So, for example, they work for a marketing firm that might want your business, or they have a child in your education program. Now, these board members or prospective board members have a different but just as strong interest in the success of your organization. The parent needs you to succeed in order for their child to continue benefiting from services. And the marketing business owner can use you as a guinea pig for new services and only looks better when you have success. In both scenarios, this is a strong prospecting tool. The relationship works very well as long as the potential conflicts of interest are disclosed, outlined in writing, and everyone is in full agreement about what they can and cannot expect from the separate relationships. The challenge with a vested board member is that they may have a shorter tenure once their separate vested component changes. Their kids grow up, they switch jobs, etc. Now, sometimes it's okay to let them go. Without the vested interest, they may no longer be of interest to you. But if they are, just make sure that you are understanding and developing their interest in more than just their initial investment. Do they want to volunteer? Do they want to serve on a different kind of committee? They're there for, you put them on the board because of their acumen in nonprofit financials, but they also may secretly want to be a party planner. Ask them, see if they want to get involved in gala planning. Find that out and don't assume what piques their interest. And this goes for while they are active as a board member and preceding that. And you'll hear me say this a whole bunch, that the recruiting process, the cultivation process, the vetting process, and the onboarding process all flow into one another, and none of these things are exclusive. You don't share the information about what you expect of a board member or what you want to know about a potential board member later on in the game. All of that is really valid and important as you're trying to identify who it is that you want. You got to know those things, and then you need to be talking to these prospects about why you're interested in them, what you see as their role on the board, and learning from them what they see as their role on the board and the things that they might be interested in doing. Often large corporations maintain a policy of corporate responsibility. So the corporate board member might, for example, work in a bank because banks do better in thriving communities where everyone makes and spends money, or they work for a utility or a cigarette company that needs good press. The reason why corporations do this and place board members or encourage board membership is they want to look good to their customers, and they want to build loyalty among employees because you're more likely to stay with a corporation that supports your favorite charity. For upper management, this often includes supporting board service, meaning they allow time, they allow resources, pro bono work, conference rooms, things like that, and sometimes even pay the board contribution or sponsor an event. Now, corporate board member, you can assume that they have some interest in your mission. They likely get a lot of agency in choosing what types of organizations they support. It's worthwhile to know that sometimes the money they commit isn't entirely their own. So what you want to do is look at businesses in your area. You want to be researching corporate funding prospects and see what their board policies are for placement. So if you were talking to a corporation about, I wanted them to give me a $10,000 grant, also look at, are they looking to place board members? Because you may not fit into their priorities for granting, but they may be willing to make a $10,000 board gift because the priorities are a bit more flexible when they're placing board members. Similar to the vested board member, the first goal with this corporate board member is to try to build their loyalty and make their relationship personal so it can continue if they switch jobs or their corporate policy changes in some way. There's then the helper. This is someone who just wants to help. This is someone who likes your organization, has time on their hands, though not necessarily a specific skill or obvious resource. They are trying to make themselves known to you a lot of times, but they may not know very much about board service. They may be surprised or struggle with the financial commitment of board service. They may come in with a lot of ideas that should be welcomed and encouraged. And once again, your responsibility in turn is to educate them on what board service means to your organization and the best ways that they can support the organization and provide the types of support specifically that you need. The last is the boss. This is the kind of board member who comes in because they just want to run something. They often come in with an agenda. They've heard a little bit about what you need and are certain they know exactly how to get you there. They apply experiences from their jobs or other boards or corporate boards to determine what changes need to be made, and may or may not bother to learn about your organization's history or experience of the board, of the people that brought the company as far as it was. Sometimes these are board members who withhold their contribution or resources until the changes they are suggesting are made, and those suggestions or demands that you and your staff are expected to follow. These are brought under the auspices of this is the only way to succeed. The boss board member takes a whole lot of different forms, and often they're asking really good questions. They have very valid criticisms of the organization, and they may be right that change is necessary, and they may or may not be the ones to lead that charge. This board member invariably has money, and the suggestion that there is more money to come or has resources, there's often a carrot that they are dangling. Again, going back to expectations with every board member, especially the ones that seem ideal, the ones that seem like they're going to be providing the resources, they're going to be providing the kind of leadership. It is also important that you are vetting how they're going to fit within your organization. And are they going to understand what is both expected of them and allowed by them, allowed of them. And sometimes we get into the situation where you have to walk away from a potentially good board member because they aren't going to fit within the organization, or they're going to push your organization to shift and change and grow in a way that may not make sense for your organization. So how do you manage all of the personalities and the challenges? And in truth, you can't entirely. You need to recognize with your board of directors that these are individuals that are being asked to be more than a donor, more than a volunteer. They're opening up their calendars, their address books, their wallets, and as a result, your board deserves time and respect. And even when you don't like when they are doing something or when you don't like what they have to say, everyone should be held accountable for their work in some way. So when it comes to your board, it starts by doing your very best to set your board up to be successful. And we're going to talk about that, but also making sure that you are also accepting and respecting their role within the organization. It doesn't mean catering to them, but acknowledging that they are there to help and giving them the opportunity to help, guiding them, supporting them so that they can help your organization in a way that is effective. That is an essential part of your role. So let's talk about, what do you want your board members to be? Actually, I'll pause for a moment. Jill, any burning questions here that we should pause for, or I think we can get to them at the end?
Yeah, no, I think we can wait to the end. It's certainly about the question of bylaws versus policy descriptions and things like that.
Excellent. All right, and I may get to some of these questions. All right, what do you want your board members to be? First and foremost, you want your board members to be donors. I think we all feel that way. I'm sorry, that's a misstatement. I think 90% of us feel that way. There are some organizations that are not fundraising organizations, and interestingly, there are a lot of organizations that are not fundraising organizations until they reach a certain juncture within the life of their company, and then they become or start to explore becoming fundraising organizations. So For the most part, I think we should keep on the list that you want your board members to be donors, that you want your board members to be fundraisers as well. So when asking someone to join your board, you want to make clear that there is a minimum donation that will be expected, if that is in fact the case. And if it is not in fact the case, and it should be, you need to be having that conversation with your board now. As costs rise and the company grows, you also need to make clear to the board prospect and to the board members that minimum amount is likely going to need to grow as the company grows and inflation happens. You also want to be clear that if fundraising is a primary function, then they need to know that they will be expected to solicit donations or sell tickets to fundraising events. That you will support them, that you're going to educate them on the most effective ways to raise funds, that you're going to determine the ways in which they are most comfortable asking for money, that you're going to do a fair amount of the legwork for them. But if you want your board to be a fundraising board, that can't be a gotcha later on. It can't be, we're so glad to have you on our board. You're going to be sitting in meetings, you get to go to parties, and then, oh, by the way, you need to sell a table of 10 for this event. That has to be something that they know ahead of time. And what I find fascinating quite often is when board members are recruiting others, they're scared to say that because it means they're scared that someone's going to walk away, as though that person won't just walk away later when they find out later that this is an expectation of them. You want board members who are excited about doing these things, or at least curious, or at least willing. You want your board members to be advocates or ambassadors about the organization. You want them to be talking about it. You want them sometimes to be worker bees, and this is the kind of thing that you need to determine for your organization. Do you want them to sometimes be stuffing letters? And if so, you want to make sure you're managing their expectations about the kinds of things that you want them to be doing. Or you may not want them to be worker bees. You may want to be very clear that you are joining our organization, but your role as a volunteer is a separate thing. Or you're not going to be able to sit in on, programming types of things because there still is a confidentiality. You want to make sure that you know what you want your board members to be and that you are documenting these things. You also want to think about what resources you want your board to bring to the table. And these last two slides are all about your gap analysis. What do you currently have on your board and what are you missing? You want to sit down and make this list. Do you want folks that are able to make contributions or solicit contributions? Do you want folks that are able to host a fundraising event or are really connected to other people who might have access to money, like corporations or private foundations? Do you want people with a large network just to grow your constituency? To grow your mailing list, to get people to show up to rally in some way or advocate in some way? Do you need marketing support? Do you need industry credibility or legal support? There's always another contract or negotiation to be done. Sometimes it's helpful to think about an attorney or an IT service provider who can donate equipment or donate advice. It is important as you are identifying, it's not enough to say we need a bigger board of directors. You need to know who you're looking for. And on this list, you also want to be thinking about who is representing our organization. Do they reflect the interests and the needs of the people that we are serving? Figure all of those things out, document those things so that when you are going to your board, when you are going to your stakeholders and trying to identify potential board members, you want to make sure that you are knowing who you are looking for. So some of your board members should be strong leaders. This is now about personality. One who asks the hard questions of the board, the ones that ask hard questions of the board and of themselves. You also want a strong leader who is inspiring to other board members to give their best and model good board service themselves. Someone who could be a good spokesperson for the organization. You also want one or two of them to be financially wise in nonprofit budget management, and they should understand the details of the budget and audit and work with the business manager on planning and reporting. These are some of the things, core things that you want to make sure that you actually have within your organization. You often want some of them to be worker bees. When you need an extra pair of hands, it's nice to have a couple board members who can do that, even if you've started to develop a staff that is doing a lot of those other things. Sometimes it's helpful to know that you have that extra pair of hands when you need them. You also want at least a couple people who can make a larger contribution than the standard gift gap. But most importantly, every member of your board of directors should understand and be passionate about the work. Every one of them should be making some sort of personally meaningful contribution to the organization. Now, I don't necessarily advocate that that has to be dollars. Sometimes that doesn't work. But if it's not dollars, it should be time or resources or something, some way in which they are identifying this organization as one of their top three charitable priorities. For some people, that's $5 a year. That's all they can afford. But if they are giving $5 to their child's school and $5 to their church, you should also be getting, if they are a board member, you should also be getting that $5, right? Now, many people, that's also $100 or $5,000, whatever it is that personally meaningful. If you want to quantify it in some way, a lot of times we do that by quantifying it as included in their top three charities a year. And then lastly, every board member needs to be willing and motivated to be an ambassador for your organization. Whether they're giving a lot of money or not, whether they understand the budget or not, whether they're a worker bee or not, really, your board's job is to be an ambassador to you. I'm sorry, an ambassador for you. But the point here is that your board should be this combination of people, a diverse combination of people that work well together and fill in the holes of what's needed for the organization, that are representative voices of what you need to hear, who have expertise to help you make informed and strategic decisions about the direction of what you are trying to do. It should be a manageable size. Each board member takes time to communicate with and cultivate, and making the time to do that is important. What's the right size before it comes up in the chat? It depends. It depends on how much staff you have. It depends on how strong a board president you are who can help you with managing the relationship with the board members. Whatever it is, you need to make sure that you are maintaining these relationships, because a successful current board is what is going to lead you to a successful future board. A successful small board is what's going to lead you to a successful larger board. Like anything we attempt to do, we are only successful if we understand what is expected of us. So, with all we've explored, keep in mind that to start, you want to develop your board member's job description. You want to start with the standard things, right? Go back to your bylaws. Look at what it is you say your board is supposed to be. Is this a governance board? Is this, are they approving an annual budget? Legally, they have to. So, yes, that should be written in there. Is your board responsible for setting goals? Is your board responsible for doing their annual disclosure of conflicts of interest, all of those kinds of things? You want to make sure that is documented, so that when you talk to a board member who, for example, has a vested interest that could prove a conflict, you want to make sure you're talking about that at the get-go to say, yeah, we think that you're fantastic. We love the fact that you own a marketing firm. We would be happy to consider using your services, but we're going to have to put that up for, for an RFP to make sure that we're getting the best deal. There isn't a guarantee. Next, you want to make sure that you are documenting the logistical expectations, their annual contribution, the number of meetings they're expected to attend a year. Can they attend via Zoom? How long are the meetings? How many are they allowed to miss? and also what you need from them. You want to document that you want them to be an ambassador, that they must participate in a committee or two, whether or not they need to also volunteer, and whether or not they are going to be expected to participate in fundraising. Well, some of this may be assumed. There's so much value in documenting a list of their roles and responsibilities, because in addition to clarifying what is expected once they join, it also ensures that you have all the details during the cultivation prospect, so a prospective board member already knows what they're getting into. This is so important. And the question then comes up, actually, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but this is so important to make sure that you're documenting these things. So how do you find a board member? It starts by knowing your constituency. I'm gonna do a quick little hypothetical. Imagine you are a dance company, a nonprofit dance company, and the night you present your first show, a young couple happens upon it on their first date. The event was free. They didn't pay a dime. They don't live at a fancy address. They don't live in your city. They're not important to you, right? They came by for 20 minutes and then off they went. But now imagine years go by and he gets an entry-level job in your city and he misses her. So whenever he finds a dime, he checks out your shows and reports back to her over a long distance FaceTime. And 2 years later, she's in for a visit and he proposes over dinner and surprises her by taking her to one of your shows, which has become a tradition for them. He quickly gets promoted. They move to a fancy address in your city. He still takes his wife to the first preview of every show you present, and now starts a new tradition of taking his daughter to a closing night. You have become a part of their family. You want to know that, right? And perhaps you will have heard their story along the way, but maybe not. Maybe these are not people who announce themselves to you. Maybe they are very quietly making you, they never occurred to them to tell you where your organization is. And if you're not a dance company, maybe this is about volunteering at a soup kitchen. This is something that they've done time and time again. Maybe this is about a different way, a donation that they give every year. And it wasn't very much money, but they started by giving a $10 donation. And then as their child starts to get older, they start doing a percentage of that child's allowance to make a donation. And perhaps you will hear their story, but if you don't, you want to make sure that you have been tracking your constituency from day one. And it lived in a database with a clean set of historical records that are shared by multiple departments. So if you have someone who's managing your volunteers and keeping a list on the back of a napkin of who showed up that day, and then you have GiveButter, a free online service for your donations, if those two lists never merge, you would have no way of knowing that these individuals already care about your organization. So it starts by knowing who is already committed to your organization. Sorry, I lost my place in my notes here. Yes, it should be a goal to have every person who likes your Facebook post to go from Facebook fan to member or volunteer to donor to potentially even board member. Now, is that going to happen with most? Absolutely not. But for a certain few, yes, it should. And every stakeholder, every constituent should be treated and tracked like that's the goal. And the only way that works is if you are tracking them and knowing their relationship with the organization. So I ask you, are you the one, and for some of you who are one person shop, maybe you are, but are you the one that is putting up social media posts, or have you farmed that off to an intern? Are you the one that is actually posting things on Instagram and taking a look at who likes them? Should you track every like? It's a little bit tricky, but should you start to notice if someone is liking every single one of your posts? Yeah, that's important. Those individuals are very, very subtly announcing themselves to you. Do you then follow them back? Do you then try to figure out who they are connected to. Are they connected to someone who is served by your organization? Are they connected to a board member? Are they connected to a funding source? If you aren't following the breadcrumbs, if you aren't paying attention to who is already in front of you, you are going to miss those folks. It's tedious, but if you are starting and saying, we don't know where to begin, you have to start by looking at, we always say the first, the immediate circle around us, but you have to actually look at what is the immediate circle around you. It's not just the people with the loudest voices, it's the people that are showing up, that are doing so in a little way. So reach out to them. Start to follow them. Start to see who went from doing a $5 donation to a $10 donation. Those weren't important to you. In fact, they were probably more trouble than they were worth, right? The amount of time it took for you to get that donation into your database, send them thank you note, the whole thing is probably not worth the $5. But if that $5 jumps to 10, you should notice that. And if that $10 jumps to 15, you definitely should notice that, even though these are tiny numbers that are coming into your organization. And that's when you want to start reaching out to those individuals. The process of building a prospect list has to be ongoing. Your board, even if you're not seeking board members right now, your board may be the perfect size for a period of time. You never know when someone is going to, move out of state or move on. So this process of identifying and cultivating new board members, new stakeholders, new supporters, it often can take months, right? We're really talking about who is liking your posts on LinkedIn. That's a long process. That person, if they are in fact going to be the right person that goes from LinkedIn follower to board member, that could be a 5-year process, but you have to start that 5 years at some point. And so you want to make sure that you are paying attention to who is already engaging with your organization. Social media just being one example. Look at your volunteers, look at those individuals that you are serving who are showing up, who want to know a little bit more. But again, you should not be doing this process alone, because if you are, 1 to 3 person staff, the idea of tracking down every Instagram follower sounds daunting, and it definitely is. Which is why you have a board of directors who should be part of the process of board development. They should be key in recruiting new members, and your job is to prime them to be effective ambassadors. That includes making their meetings worthwhile, them actively listening and participating and asking questions. Your board first needs to learn enough about your organization in order to be an effective ambassador for your organization. That includes all the stuff, all the boring things that we need to get to in a typical board meeting, but that also includes mission moments. You sometimes recruit a board member by telling them all the wonderful things that you're doing, all of the impact. We work so hard on our impact numbers, and then they become a board member, and then all we talk about is numbers. All we talk about is dollars, right? All we talk about are the problems. If we don't make sure that the board also remembers why they're there, if they don't get those anecdotes, the opportunity to experience or at least learn about the insider track of why you're doing what you're doing, often that's when you start to lose a board member, or that's when they start to say, you're asking them to be advocates for the organization and they don't know how to do it because they don't have enough information to be doing it effectively. The answer for and now board members, this happens all the time. You say to your board, you have to be talking about, you need to be bringing this prospect to the table, right? And your board nods and they smile, and then they walk out of the meeting, and it's like they've never come across another human being on the planet, right? Training your board to be ambassadors is far simpler than we often think it is. You say to a board, we want you to be ambassadors. You have to recruit new members. There's a whole lot of pressure in that. I'm going to encourage you to actually change the narrative. You don't need them to bring you a new board member. That sounds intimidating. That sounds like something nobody wants to do. But instead, you want them to be talking about your organization literally all the time. The answer to the polite question, what's new, is the next initiative or challenge for your organization. When somebody asks, how are you? They are feeling excited about an award one of the mentees won, or or concerned about diversifying funding streams. You should be asking your board members to think about the people in their lives and confirm that the people they are closest to, their closest friends, their closest relatives, do they know that they serve as a member of this board? Is this something they talk about? Is this part of their lives that they are able to share with their friends? Or are they spending a whole lot of time talking about the weather, talking about last night's game, and never mentioning this thing that they have already decided is important to them? So the next way to be finding your board members is by your board members identifying people by talking about it. And it doesn't work for everyone, right? Like they're going to do this a lot, and 75% of the people they talk to, their eyes are going to glaze over. There's no interest. Yeah, I'm not, that's not my thing. And that's okay. That's the next piece of this. You want to make sure that your board as ambassadors also has a lot of permission to not be successful in this. If you are berating everyone for none of you brought me a board member this month, that's okay. Instead, if you say to them, how many of you had a conversation about our organization over the last, since our last meeting, over the last month, over the last quarter? Start to look at it in that way, and you may find that feels tangible. That feels like a goal that your board can start focusing on. The success of this is in the details. Now you're recruiting the folks that are paying attention to you. Your board is being an ambassador. All of this gets lost if you do not have a way to process this information. I regularly have executive directors tell me my board doesn't know anybody. And I will say to them, and then I'll talk to a board member and they'll say, I've been trying. I keep on mentioning people and nothing ever happens. And so I ask you, those of you that are leaders of organizations, has your board member ever said to you something like, I need to introduce you to my friend Bill. I gotta bring Bill in. And invariably that's, like at the end of a board meeting, it's 9 o'clock at night, you now have to clean up all of the wine and pretzels that have been, eaten at the board meeting. And so you're like, yes. And then you write on a little Post-it note and you put it in your bag. And that Post-it note says Bill, right? And then you go home and you go through your normal evening routine and don't get back to the office until the following Monday. And you find that Post-it note and you see the word bill and you're like, oh, that must be a bill that I have to pay. And you put that Post-it note on your desk and it falls to the ground and then you instantly forget about it, right? What we're missing is these details, the devil that's in these details. When a board member says to you, I want to introduce you to my friend Bill, you need to be following up with that board member and you need to be setting the standard with your board to say, when you have a prospect, here's what I need you to do. I need you to write me an email, or I'm going to follow up with an email to say, you mentioned that you had a prospect to me. I would love their first name, last name, and I would like contact information. I would also like context. I would like to know what makes you think they would like. I want what makes them a great prospect. What did you have? What was it that inspired you to say that I need to speak to Bill? And are you willing to make an introduction to Bill? Are you willing to write an email, not that just says, hey, Amy, meet Bill, have fun, right? Instead, Amy, I wanted to introduce you to my friend Bill, who is a brilliant financial mind. And he has been on the board of several nonprofits. He's looking for a new thing. And I think he would be, the right fit. If they make that introduction, you now have something to do with it. And you need to make sure on your own administrative end that you now have a follow-up process. That name needs to go into your database. If you don't have a database, that name needs to go into your one Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheet where you are tracking your constituency. And on that list is also the person that's been following you on Instagram and the tiny pieces of information that you've been collecting about them too. So that when you start to send e-blasts, when you start to send newsletters, you have a list of folks that you are constantly going back to. And then lastly, once you've gone through all this process, you will end up with a new board member. And we can talk a little bit about the process. Everyone loves to ask the question of, but now what? What do you need to do in order to vote a board member in? Honestly, it's relatively simple. vote a board member in, come up with a simple process that it is as non-labor intensive as you're comfortable with it being. That doesn't, and this ends up being this thing where, well, do they have to meet every single member of the board? Typically, no. Do we have to vote them in an annual meeting? Typically, no. You can do it over email, right? Because when you have someone who is right, you want to get them on the board as soon as possible because you want to encourage their enthusiasm. You want to keep them involved and get them involved and keep that interest going. Once you have them on, you want to make sure that you are introducing them to everyone, giving them a chance to introduce themselves. You want to make sure everyone has their contact information. You're updating your list. You're doing a press release. You want to make sure that someone feels really welcome so that they acknowledge that being on this board is special. Even if that press release doesn't get picked up by anyone, reminding them to put it on their LinkedIn, encouraging other board members to welcome them on their LinkedIn so that they feel part of something. The other thing we typically do is introduce a new board member by walking them through the budget. Most likely, they're coming into the time of year where you have not done budget for a while, right? And they may take a little while to get back to it. I like to walk through an operating budget because it makes sure that you are covering all of the things. It reminds them of their fiduciary responsibility. It reminds them of the expectation of how much money needs to be raised, and you can talk about how they get involved. But it also allows you to go over all of the expenses. And you then can realize, well, I've talked to them about these core programs that we do, but we have this ancillary program that you maybe didn't mention it to them. And it may turn out that that ancillary program is the thing that they are going to become the most passionate about. So I like to do an onboarding where we walk them through the entire budget. Set them up if it feels like they're a little lost, or just to prevent it, set them up with a buddy or a mentor, another board member who has been around for a little while, to sit next to them during the first meeting so that when they're a little lost, they can say, hey, I don't know what's going on. Or as a board president or as an executive director, remember to slow down and say, wait, we have a new board member here. Let's slow this down and make sure that they are up to speed. Get them involved immediately. Can't tell you how many times an organization says they just joined. We're not going to put them on a committee for a year. Well, your term limits are 2 years. You're going to wait a full year to put them on. They joined the board because they wanted to join the board. Get them busy. They're going to catch up if it's in front of them. If you make them wait a year to slowly sit on the sidelines trying to figure out everything that's going on, it's going to take them a year to do it, right? And then lastly, just like board communication, you want to be in communication with them. You want to be building a friendship. You want to be building a mutually respectful relationship so that your board members are feeling enthusiastic and then getting involved in the board development process themselves. Whew, that was a lot of information. So I'm going to jump to this slide. Please do look for me on LinkedIn as well. And Jill, I actually have these in front of me, so I'm going to jump back to these questions.
Okay.
Okay, let's see.
I can read them to you. One is at
Please.
12:19 about the bylaws. You may want to just address those first.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you for giving me the time. That's helpful. Should bylaws actually spell out consequences for those who do not give or get, notwithstanding a commitment to do so? I don't think so. Because what that does is it doesn't allow your board member to have a challenge, right? To have a difficult year. If we as nonprofit organizations, we're in service of others, right? So I think making it punitive is the wrong way to go about doing it. If a board member is not meeting their give get, what that warrants is a conversation and not a penalty in some way, because you never know what's going on behind someone else's closed doors. Bylaws should be the highest level of what it is your organization is doing. Bylaws are really cumbersome to change. You want the core of what it is your organization should be. But so often I see organizations that, have bylaws that say they, must have 10 board members, but they don't have 10 board members and therefore can't take a vote on anything. That doesn't work. Give it a range, make them more flexible, make sure your bylaws are reflecting the way the minimum of the way you need to do business. But certainly I would not recommend them be punitive. So there's a question here, I think is a direct message to me about where to find grants to support their project. Nina from Manhattan Beach, why don't you follow up with us separately? There are actually videos of old webinars about grant making. That's probably the best place to do that, that we can follow up separately. That was answered. How do we change out board members before their term is up per bylaws? I would encourage that every board fills out a board plan, is encouraged to fill out a board plan at the start of every fiscal year. This is my commitment. I am committing to be the, sort of sign off on a paragraph, right? Of like the highest, most, I believe in the mission, I'm here. And then they fill out some things. I am planning to make a gift of this amount at this time in this way. I am planning on reaching out to this many people in order to participate in fundraising activities. I'm planning on volunteering this many hours, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end of each fiscal year, asking each board member to sit down with the board president and do a self-evaluation. I think that I have found that this is the cleanest way for a board member to basically self-select out. So instead of being in the position of having to kick someone out, you then get to be in the position of giving someone permission to move on. Because then you can have the conversation when you look at a board plan and you look at where they were at the end of the year and have them do their own assessment. Either they get the opportunity to say, you know what, I want to step up differently. I didn't fulfill this. I'd love to tell you about why, or maybe they won't. But you can then give them permission by saying, it looks like this is a lot and it seems like this is a busy time in your life. We want you to know that you don't have to be a board member to be a supporter of this organization. It doesn't change how we feel about you. So that would be my recommendation. Should an attorney board member be identified as such? Only in a conflict of interest if you think it's going to be a conflict of interest. We often list the affinities of our board members. Just because it's nice to show the success and the skill of the members and the diversity of our members of our board. But no, they don't need to be identified as such. Did I miss it, Jill?
There was a question about some sample job descriptions for board members, and I suggested we could send those out when we send our follow-on email.
Yeah, absolutely. We can take a look for some of that. And in the follow-up email, I believe we're going to have a link. We have some very limited office hours to follow up on specific things related to fundraising and related to board development. You can fill out a form, and if we are able to help, we certainly can be in touch one-on-one. Again, I'm Amy Fiore on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with you. And I thank you all.
Amy, thank you very much. All right, everybody have a great day.